morning, everybody. Mr. Bindu, Lohani, friends, colleagues. I'm going to be remarkably brief in my opening remarks because if you look at the program, I'll be coming back up here to speak for about 20 minutes on the report and on the school and why we are strong supporters of this project. But I want to begin by actually just thanking all of you. It is not easy to assemble a group at 9 o'clock in the morning to come and listen to a report. So I'm actually very impressed by this turnout that we have this morning, and we are truly grateful that all of you have come here for this event to launch this new report. And I hope you'll find it worthwhile as you hear the various explanations about the different dimensions of this study. And I myself, in my remarks, will try to explain why this study is very, very timely, and I think couldn't have possibly come at a better time in terms of the evolution of what's happening in Asia. So I hope you'll have a great morning. I was going to also emphasize to all of you that after we make our opening presentations, we'll be coming up here for a discussion. We hope you think of some extremely difficult questions that you can pose to us. I anticipate some questions on why Singapore is ranked number 10 in the Creative Productivity Index, but I'm sure we can have a good discussion on that also. The reason I know why that's going to be a question is because this morning I watched Mr. Bindu Lohani on BBC Asia Business Report, and he was asked, why is Singapore ranked number 10? So I can see that that's the number one question that everybody's going to ask. So anyway, with that, welcome. Let's try to make this morning as interesting as possible and useful to all of you also. And once again, thank you for coming.
Good morning, Dean Kishore Mahbubani. Normally people tell you that don't speak after Professor Mahbubani, but since he's only introduced, he's okay at the moment. So he's going to speak later, the substance part. Many known group, many known faces. Thank you very much for coming. My job this morning is to tell you a little bit about why we did this study and what is this study, how we did it, and then we'll have some substance presented. And the most interesting part is going to be on the Q&A later. A few years ago, ADB did a study called Asia 2050. How will Asia look like in 2050? And our study showed that Asia has the potential to have 52% of the global GDP, the way it's growing now. But it's not preordained. It has many challenges, and if those challenges are not tackled by the governments in Asia, it could fall back to 32% of the GDP, which is not much, which we like to call a middle income trap. Because today, Asia already accounts about 28% of the global GDP. So what's big from 28% to 32% GDP in 2050? And in the context of this study, to get out of the middle income trap, we say that maybe one of the way the countries need to do is to get into the knowledge-based economy. And when we look at the OECD data, the OECD countries have 50% of the GDP come out of the knowledge-based economy. So therefore, we started benchmarking, looking at them, see what they have done right, and what is something we can learn from them, as well as some of our own developed economies, knowledge-based economies like Singapore, Japan, Korea, Taipei, China, Hong Kong, China. Look how they have done it to get there, which we felt would be very, very useful for the other countries who all are aspiring not only to become the middle-income country, but eventually the OECD and the developed country. So that's the background for the study. It's a unique study because we don't see many of them. I haven't seen many of them. There are some done by other institutions, but the focus has been different. And to do such a study is even more harder when you start looking at the countries. So we took 4 countries, China, India, Indonesia, and Kazakhstan, just to get some diversity on that. And the country reports will have those specific examples, what they could do to get there. We felt that such a study at this point in time especially when the growth model is being questioned, countries are looking into again. There was a high growth in a country like China, and they're saying, can I look at it differently? There's some moderation of the growth at this point in time. And I think this debate, therefore, is very, very timely. I'm very, very fortunate. We're very fortunate we have LK Kuan School to co-sponsor this, and someone like Kishore Mahbubani, who is the, by the way, the co-chair of this study, who guided the study together with Professor Larry Summers. And there are many other eminent people who were needed for a study like that to sound out. Because there are certain things you can look from the data, certain thing you will have to ask the knowledgeable people to get from their brain. And this study had that advantage with Professor Kishore Mahbubani and Larry Summers as the co-chair for the study. We focus 4 pillars, just to be able to compare with the OECD country. You can ask why 4, why not 6, why not 8, why 36 indicators, why 8 outputs. I mean, these are all questions the academicians will ask. I used to be once an academician. But you need to put a cut at this so that you are able to make some sense or not sense out of the report and be able to make your own interpretation. And that's always the case with a study of this nature. We did look at economies like Finland, because as it became attractive, Korea and Singapore, and if you read the report, some of the highlights of these countries, what they did right, which the other countries could use it, is there. So volume 1 of this study is primarily for that, providing what could be the next policy agenda a country may undertake if the country has the desire to get in this knowledge economy. The integral part of this study is the Economist EIU, Economist Intelligence Unit, Creative Productivity Index, CPI. Dean Kishore already asked the first questions, and I was asked the same question this morning by BBC, why Singapore is number 1 in input required for creative productivity, but it's only 6th in the output, and why is overall 10? Maybe you can explain that later. The way I mentioned to BBC is, look, to have all those 36 indicators and then finally say the input, I'm number 1, means you have everything going on right to get in the innovation and the productive area. It means that you have created the environment and the policy environment, you have incentives to do that, and you also have the capacity to do that. And just because you have all of these, if it doesn't necessarily relate to the output that you want. And that is one explanation I give. The other explanation to me is, in the calculation of the 8 indicators, EIU, you may explain them later, there are 2 indicators which also captures agriculture, because we're looking at the whole Asia. And obviously Singapore and Hong Kong are not very big in agriculture. They have taken some proxy data. So I won't lose my sweat on this. I would simply, if I were, you will have a better explanation, EIU, later, I'll say, I have more opportunity to improve my output, and I'll go deeper, even taking those indicators out where that would be in the context of mine. And there are also outputs like patents. Is that important? And we have some expert who could talk about that. So I'm not going to talk more about it because we'll get more, but we've actually already questioned the EIU. Maybe you can explain in your presentation. What are some of the messages coming out of the report? Very generic messages. Sometimes it may sound very generic, very common sense, but they're very far-reaching when you start looking in the context of the country. We're finding that the countries which have moved into the knowledge economy has provided a significant amount of resources for R&D. In fact, if you do not put enough resources for R&D, which is in this case measured as percentage of the GDP, you're not going to make it. I mean, that's the conclusion. You have to focus innovation and creativity in education. Most of the Asian educations in the early days, although it's changing, was very much focused on studying something which you needed, and then immediately after get out from the school, you look for a good job or in a good company, and I'm already successful. Asians, including myself, I think when I went to school, I wasn't told about productivity, creativity, that you should start your own firms and companies and try to become an entrepreneur. And when I know now, it's already too late for me. So I hope for the younger people, we'll be able to tell the story that you can create your own job, you can create your own opportunities, but we need to have that mindset change. Asians still have this face issue of I need a good degree and never mind my skill. And that's a research study has shown that in many fields we have degrees, education, but don't have the skill required by the employers. And that issue is going to be even more in future. The report says there will be so many jobs. It says almost 45 million jobs in 2050, but you will not have enough people to get the job. On the other hand, you have lots of people with the kind of skills, you don't need them. So this is going to be a serious correction that we need in the education system. We also asked a question, Asia should be, the best place to develop some of the unique opportunities for innovations. We look at 7 of the top economies in Global Service Location Index, which are the locations in the world which becomes very important for creating global opportunities. India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, China, Thailand, Vietnam, 7 of them are here. So we are well placed to be globally innovative and move into the knowledge economy. 3 of the Asian countries, China, Hong Kong, China, and India, are among the top 10 exporters today of creative goods, accounting almost 30% of the world trade in 2008. So it's already placed. We also have the same data on the internet, which I will not bore you too much. And Asians always talk and want to leapfrog on technologies. I can't say, particularly for some of the developing country, what we see is still how to put this, like a commission agent mentality. Let me get the FDI technology, I take my commission and let them do the job, and that's fine with me. A few countries like Korea, which I studied in detail one time, they said, okay, FDI is fine, but I want to absorb it, I want to be able to have that technology and do it myself over a period of time. I mean, that kind of the policy and the mandate plus the education level needs to be created, and Asia can do a lot more on that one. The second area where Asians could do so much better is the frugal innovation. There's a lot of things that happens in Asia, but it's going to have to be somebody else somewhere from the world has to come out, find it about it, turn into business. And because we don't have sometimes a system to help them, we don't have funds to help them, we don't have a policy to incubate and encourage them, and therefore we say the importance of funding the R&D, and not only that, creating resources available for those frugal technologies to globalize it. I know several of the examples you will see in the report which could have been taken and turned into a global business, but we don't have that kind of resources on one hand. On the other hand, the support that is required, and in many cases through the government, to do all of that. Coming closer, I'd like to say what are the critical actions therefore the developing countries, the countries which are on the bottom of the knowledge economy. And if you see in the chart, we have average of Asian countries with 4.39, where the OECD countries is almost 8.2 or plus. So there's a lot of difference in terms of the knowledge-based economy that Asia could look for and do better to get into there. Although the top 5 Asian countries are already closer and even higher than the OECD countries, the top 5 which I mentioned: Japan, Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, China, and Taipei, China. 3 things I would mention that if the government had to close eyes and say, what would I do based on the finding of the report, I would give as much priority to highways as I would do to highways today. With a lot of there's the investment in the IT is not much. And Sushila is saying, our IT expert in the Asian Development Bank, she not said, we need to do more to the whole region. Even ADB needs to do more to the countries down there. Second, creating the world-class education hubs. And in Singapore, I don't have to mention that. They already have created quite a bit of that. And there is never enough. And we need to go deeper and deeper from having a world-class university to world-class centers of excellence and the hubs. So there is enough, and that needs lots of support in terms of research, both from public sector and private sector, and a policy that encourages both in the academics and elsewhere, and make innovation at the heart of the knowledge economy, which is the thrust from this report. In brief, we are very fortunate to do this sort of launching here in Singapore, because here I think the audience might say, yeah, we know it all. We know it all. And it's good to do in a place where we know it all, because we want your feedback and see what we don't know, what you know, so that we can put them in our report and make it even better. Having said that, thank you very much for coming this morning, and I hope you will have a productive morning. Thank you very much.
Very good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to present the highlights from the ADB study on Innovative Asia. The report is in 2 volumes, as you will have seen. The first volume looks at general trends and developments in a number of countries in Asia. And the second volume looks at a little bit more in depth in terms of case studies of four countries. Thank you very much for the opportunity from the ADB as well as from NUS to make this presentation this morning. As VP Lohani said, the spectacular growth rates that Asian economies have enjoyed in the recent years have been much talked about and much celebrated. They have steadily improved their position in world economies. 3 of the 4 countries that were covered in the case studies, India, Indonesia, and China, are among the top 10 countries in 2013 in terms of GDP in purchasing power, power parity terms. They have steadily increased their position and their influence in world economies. However, as already mentioned in the opening remarks, this growth model, which relied on low labor cost advantages and export-oriented growth, is somewhat petering, and there is increasing pressure to look at innovation-led growth and development in the coming period. I will not try to present all the findings; it will take too long. So I'll try to and address a few key messages that are coming out from the report. The first is that developing Asia has a lot to catch up on with regard to knowledge-based economic development. As we look at 4 pillars which constitute the knowledge economy, which is innovation, ICT, education and skill, and the economic institutions, the quality of economic institutions, the regulatory quality, the enabling environment that allows innovation to flourish, that allows excellence in education and so on. So there's a lot of catching up to do for developing Asia. However, the report also amply highlights that the times are opportune. In the knowledge-based economic development in Asia can have a very unique flavor, because despite high growth rates, there's been a problem of growing inequalities, growing disparities. So using knowledge-based paradigms for development can be a very powerful tool to reduce inequality and disparity. That's the second message. And the third one is that Asia is probably at the crest of a transformational period, at the crest of a transformational wave, and it can either ride that wave by strengthening innovation-led development, or it can continue to be still far away from advanced economies in terms of the key pillars of the knowledge-based economic growth path. So if you look at this is from the knowledge economy index. Across the 4 pillars, the Asia average is, as VP also mentioned, roughly half the average of the OECD. In education, mean years of schooling, tertiary enrollments are still far away from OECD averages. In innovation, Professor Po Kam Wong is here, who's led the work on innovation for us for the study. There's a lot to catch up on with regard to investments in research and development. Although these economies, Asian economies, have increased the availability of scientists and engineers, the critical mass, the proportion of that population in overall total population to provide the critical mass for innovation is still lacking. In ICT, there's been a lot of good story coming out of Asia with regard to IT-enabled services. But in order to go further down the line on that competitive advantage, there's need for more innovation in services, more innovation to go up the value chain in the IT sector. And in the economic institution, the quality of regulation, the enabling environments are still a lot to be desired in many developing countries. It needs to be both effective and enabling. Effective, for instance, protection of IPR has to be strong, but at the same time, startup companies need to have the potential to be able to patent their work, to have the access to innovation intermediaries, to have the access to finance and venture capital to take their innovative ideas forward. So these are all areas in which Asian economies need to do more. Then the second story is about how the knowledge-based economic development paradigm can be a lot more powerful for Asian economies to address inequalities. I will come to a few stories in a little while. And the third is that there are very strong investments that need to be made now at the current time to take advantage of the positive trends and positive environment that exists in the world economic sphere, where Asia can carve a further niche for itself in the world platform. So just a little bit more on the catching up on the various pillars. With regard to economic institutions, all the advanced economies have shown that there is a strong critical role for governments to play, especially in early stage of KBE development. They need to invest, for instance, in ICT infrastructure. They need to invest upfront in supporting innovation, and then down the line, private sector comes in to make it far more effective. Although there's a lot to catch up with regard to investments in innovation, recent trends are indicating that there are good comparative advantages that Asian economies have already carved for themselves in mid-tech products. Several studies are showing that that is actually the segment of the market that is going to grow faster. Looking at the growing size of the middle class, already Asian economies are very strong in terms of their the consumption power of the middle class, and that's only going to increase going towards 2020 and 2030. The proportion of the middle class consuming power that will come out of Asia will be a lot more than any other region, and that can leverage things like, you know, the new creative industries, new digital enterprise prices, which are all new industries which are just coming up on stream now for Asian economies to benefit from. In education and training, VP Lohani already said there is a lot of obsession with degrees, and that's also causing problem of issues like graduate unemployment. There is a huge mismatch between what the education and training institutions are able to provide in terms of skills and what the market is looking for. Many surveys are showing this mismatch to be serious and growing. And somewhere education institutions need to become a lot more flexible and diversified to be in tune with what the market needs. I think VP, taking from VP's point, there is need for much more emphasis on ICT infrastructure, which is more universal. I mean, there is very good ICT infrastructure already in many parts of Asia, but there is a huge digital divide when we talk about rural, urban, and we talk about more affluent and poorer environments in developing countries. Those gaps need to be bridged for ICT to have that transformational role in the economy. And if there's one technology that is really pervaded the last mile, is mobile applications, so mobile phones. And increasingly, it is more than just a phone. It's a powerful tool which can provide e-government services, market information, online access to several opportunities in economic terms, whether it's, and also things like health, education, financial inclusion, and these can only be tapped if the app world will expand to address the potential that exists with mobile technology. There is also great potential in disruptive models in education. The whole onset of the massive online open courses has provided a huge alternative to the brick and mortar only form of education. While the business model is yet to be proved, the economic and the educational aspect of it is still to be sorted out. For instance, how will credentials be given, how will degrees be awarded, how will certificates be provided. But in terms of this sheer need to increase enrollments in developing Asia, it has a very powerful possible tool to blend the provision of education and skill development to a vast majority of young people in Asia. Now I would like to really tell you a little bit about really how it can work in real life, some real examples. This is a text-to-teach project in the Philippines. It is a collaboration between a telecom operator, a foundation, the Ministry of Education. The problem is that not only in Philippines, in many countries in developing Asia, is that we have problems with teacher resources at rural schools. We do not have adequate qualified teachers or adequate availability of good teaching learning material. And through this application and through the collaboration, this project has been able to deliver very high quality educational resources through the mobile, which can be offloaded to a TV at the school. So it really brings the best of resources to the least endowed of environments. And the second is, it really helps to bridge the gap between what's available in the best of environments and what is possible in very remote and decentralized locations. This example is about energy, sustainable energy and clean energy to poor households. This is an example from India. ADB has made a equity investment in this company called Simpa. Their model is really very simple. You have poor households with very uncertain monthly incomes who do not have the ability to invest in a solar home system upfront, and they do not have electricity in any case. So how does, so this is a business innovation by which combines microprocessing technology, mobile technology, cloud-based processing, by which the customer can pay for energy as a service. They are able to top up their availability of energy, which gets unlocked through an SMS. If they make a payment just like a mobile operator, they will make a monthly payment to a vendor, and that energy access is unlocked through cloud technology, through SMS, and it works. And we all know that although mobile technology is there, the ability of poor households to invest in calls is limited. They use as little as $1 a month for mobile calls. And this is about e-health in Bhutan. You can see the remote terrain that Bhutan, the mountainous terrain. This is again ADB supported pilot project. It looks at how we can create a link between a district hospital and a health center in a rural location. Otherwise, people would travel 25 kilometers for small. First, they will come for tests. They will come for consultations. This e-health center is fully automated, is linked into a high-speed internet, where a doctor at the district hospital is able to coordinate the consultation as well as the diagnosis of 8 different kinds without the person having to travel 25 kilometers. This is the power of technology. Bhutan is also thinking of using drones to deliver medicine. So really, when you look at high frontier technologies, how they can really be put to use in the most difficult of and most backward of regions and populations. Finally, this is about the cost of non-action. The times are very propitious. Investing at this time for the Asian economies to take the right steps, to make the right investments at this time will bring really great rewards. As per studies, there are something like 138 million people who are off-grid, but who are on net, who have through mobile phones. Most of Asia, bulk of Asia is accessing internet through the mobile. A study shows that there are 40 countries around the world, including India and Indonesia, where the number of households with mobiles exceed the number of households with electricity. In many countries in Africa, there are many more mobile banking accounts than regular bank accounts. So these are all transformational technologies. The right investments and the right enabling features would completely transform the business models of the past. I think Professor Mahbubani, in one of his blogs, has said how the Kodak is dead. So many such things are going to be dead. And if they are not replaced by the more frontier technologies, developing economies have a lot to lose. So, and the other point in this part is also the speed of change. It's the uptake of technology can be so much faster now than one can ever imagine. So within a couple of years, the type of progress that can be made is quite spectacular. So again, it's a transformational time, and it can really impact very large numbers. So that really requires a more appropriate policy mix, which looks at the costs and benefits of various technology options, enabling features, and again, for government to make more upfront investments to make it affordable for the rural poor, but also create a pathway for private sector to come down the line and invest in these enterprises. So that's what a number of developed economies have shown in their journey of knowledge-based economic development. Most crucial is that there is coordinated action across different agencies and different institutions, most particularly what is called the knowledge triangle, which is between education, innovation, and ICT. And I think that's a very powerful mix, and policies need to cohere. I think it's an important paradigm to think about when we look at policy making. Usually it is in different ministries, so we need to really look at a more coordinated action. VP Lohani, when we undertook the study, put together a multidisciplinary team. I'm from education, my colleagues from the economic side, and from the ICT side, we all work together. Large economies of the region have tremendous ability to tap this kind of synergy by just coherent policy making. And international partnerships are crucial, are critical in fact, again, as something that has been proved by the journey of advanced economies. We are in Singapore, and it is a perfect example of how they put, for instance, education on the world, technical education on the world map, on how to make education really work for the economic competitiveness of the country. Singapore ranks at the top in terms of its ability to put education and training as a competitive advantage as per the Global Competitiveness Index. It has really strengthened the creativity, the feature in education, which is an important and critical feature for human capital development for innovative economies. Increasingly, trends are showing that within the region, creating education hubs like the Singapore's initiative for Home for Talent and the ability to create regional education hubs will be extremely powerful in supporting a number of countries to ramp up the quality of their education system and the quality of their human capital. And I think it's important again to look at going beyond the existing paradigms and to try out bold moves and to try out completely different ways to look at things, which is what disruptive technologies show, and which is what the current environment amply reveals the time is ripe for. Thank you very much for the listening.
First, thanks to the Asian Development Bank and to NUS and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy for hosting this event and this launch event. We were very glad to work with the ADB to put this research across. You know, to state it very clearly, I'm Singaporean, I'm from Singapore, and I can tell you that, you know, sometimes first isn't enough for Singapore. It's really about, you know, the quality of the win. And as both Dean Mahbubani and Dr. Lohani have said, one of the interesting findings that we have stated in this research project is that Singapore finishes 10th overall in Asia for creative efficiency. And so, although I'm glad that this launch event is in Singapore, part of me feels that, you know, I wish it was in Japan, which finished first. Just to start, you know, I mean, why are we looking at creative? Why do we come up with that concept of creative efficiency? Creativity pervades all aspects of human life. It is associated with originality, ingenuity, inventiveness, and as elusive as it seems, and I think this is very important, it's a difficult concept to measure, it plays an important role in shaping societies and economies. Fostering innovation, entrepreneurship, and creativity translates into direct and tangible economic outcomes. Which also brings me to another point. Perhaps you have to excuse me for using a PowerPoint presentation, which is probably the most uncreative as it gets in terms of presentations. But it is somewhat efficient, and that's really the crux of what this Creative Productivity Index is. It's about re-examining models of growth, you know, whether it's because there are diminishing returns to capital stock, which limits what investment can do for economic growth, whether it's because as the supply of cheap labor declines, you need to shift away from an economic model that relies on labor-intensive manufacturing exports, or whether it's because the depletion of natural resources limits the sustainability of resource-driven growth. So whatever the case, whatever the country you're in, whatever economy you are, what type of economy you are in, at a point in time you get to where the way to sustain growth is through innovation, by harnessing and institutionalizing creativity, and that will become an important area of focus for policymakers. That's really where the Creative Productivity Index comes in. We are trying to develop an understanding of the conditions required to harness creativity as a critical ingredient of establishing innovation-based knowledge economies. And we built an index comparing 22 countries in Asia, a lot of them very different, along with Finland and the United States outside of Asia, obviously, as comparator countries. Now, there are many innovation indices that are out there already, and one of the key differences here that we're trying to put through is this focus of this index on efficiency. And what we do is we relate outputs to inputs, so that top box to that middle box. Basically, how good is a country at harnessing its inputs, such as a good base of scientific knowledge, into things like patents or other types of outputs. So it's not surprising that if you increase your inputs, you will likely increase your outputs. But given budget constraints and acknowledging things like the opportunity costs of increasing investments, the Creative Productivity Index, or CPI, focuses on how productive these inputs are and how they are put to use at generating outputs. It's also theory-based, so one of the things that we did was we looked at evidence from academic literature. We consulted with the ADB, and so we wanted only to use indicators that had a sound kind of intellectual basis. And we also tried to make it, and I think this is important when we are looking at Singapore as well, we wanted to make it Asia specific, right? A lot of measures of innovation are imperfect, and certainly in Asia what we have is a lot of frugal innovation, and how do you capture that? It's certainly very difficult to capture. But one of the things where we thought we could capture it were recent innovations in agriculture, which are very important to Asia. And also that's, trying to use some Asia-specific factors is also a nod to the fact that there are many different types of forms of innovations in different regions and countries. And this is the measurement. I won't spend too much time on it, but if you look at those 3 boxes at the bottom, we have human capital that looks at enrollment ratios, university industry collaboration, infrastructure, that is, from some kind of unique things like an app gap, which I'll talk about later, to more traditional things like the quality of roads and access to electricity. And then you have competition, firm dynamics, which looks at things like trade intensity, the ease of labor turnover, the level of price controls. And then you have, obviously, appropriate institutions as well. Financial institutions, access to credit, those type of things, and governance as well, level of corruption, the intellectual property protection, investor protection, those types of things. So all of those 3 boxes on the bottom, we aggregated all those indicators and summed them up into one index, which is the Creative Input Index. And then we also looked at measures of innovation, which are things like patents, agricultural productivity, export sophistication, and we also sum all of those up and made another index. And what we did in terms of this efficiency measure is we found the ratio of the top box to that middle box, so outputs to inputs. And what are some of the key findings of the CPI? It does reveal some surprising findings. The United States, for example, despite being one of the most advanced economies in the world, is only ranked 4th behind Japan, Finland, and the Republic of Korea. The reason for this lies in how efficiently the given level of inputs are used to generate outputs. So Japan actually performs worse than the United States in all those 3 boxes that you saw in terms of creative inputs, but it is more efficient at turning those inputs into a relatively high level of creative outputs. Japan tops the ranking in number of patents per capita, an issue the government has prioritized in recent years. Its highest scores are achieved in infrastructure and financial institutions. Public expenditure on R&D is high in Japan, and those are some of the things that are pushing Japan up. The Republic of Korea ranks 2nd in Asia and 3rd overall, and it's very similar to Japan in terms of its performance. It's able to generate a high level of outputs relative to its relatively low score on the dimensions of creative destruction and appropriate institutions. What's good in Korea, Shanti touched on some of these. It has excellent infrastructure, especially IT infrastructure. The government provides extensive IT facilities in schools. Some of its weaknesses lies in rigid labor markets as a result of a historically state-driven development process. Finland is 2nd overall, you'll see it there. Scores well in infrastructure, governance, and competition, no surprises there. But it's also number 1 in the output category, with a very strong performance in scientific outputs. At the bottom there, you'll see Cambodia and Pakistan with a lot of room for improvements in human capital, in infrastructure, and in governance. And Singapore is number 10 in the index, but it's number 1 in inputs. And obviously there are a lot of questions on Singapore, and so we'll get to that in just a second. One of the things that we wanted to point out is that before I talk about Singapore is to one of the ways that we can interpret this table, right? It's a very simple table. And if you look at the list of countries, just to the left of that, you have the rank of all the countries. And so it goes from green to light green, or whatever that color is, to yellow, and then to red. And so one of the things that we look at is where are those colors then mismatched on the 2 other columns beside it, right? So you have the overall category and then input and output. And where you see some mismatches, that really warrants looking deeper into those countries to see why those mismatches occurs. So you see one of those stark mismatches is in Lao PDR. It finishes very low in terms of inputs, so it has very bad creative inputs, and relatively low in outputs as well. But in terms of its efficiency, it's not too bad. And then obviously we want to talk about Singapore. And I have to preface this by saying that Singapore is by no means an innovation laggard. It has both high levels of creative outputs and very high levels of creative inputs. But compared to the other high-income economies in the region, its production of output is relatively low. Singapore has top scores for nearly all the indicators of infrastructure, of firm dynamics, and of governance. But despite this stellar performance, some other indicators reveal dimensions where there is scope for improvement. It has relatively low scores on the enrollment of students in technical and vocational programs, returns to education, and the amount of domestic credit available to the private sector. Now, I think we will definitely discuss this a bit later. So one of the questions to tackle is how do you do that indicator of agricultural productivity? Obviously, Hong Kong and Singapore don't have any measures for that. And so what we did was we used the average score. But you know, when you're comparing countries across Asia and you want to capture some aspects of innovation that are specific to Asia, you have to make certain trade-offs in the data. Now, what are some of the policy implications that we can take from the CPI? When we look at this graph here, on the vertical axis is the creative output index, and on the horizontal axis you have the creative input index. So the CPI shows that there are two distinct groups of economies here. One group of 9 mainly higher income economies that have both high levels of outputs and high levels of inputs. So those are the ones near the top of the graph. And then one group of 15 mainly low income economies that have low levels of inputs and low levels of outputs. So deeper analysis of this kind of graph, this efficiency, shows that the second group, so the group at the bottom, has the most to gain from inputs, from policies to improve inputs. Appropriate investments in these countries will have a higher marginal benefit and could help close the creativity gap that we are seeing in Asian economies. Now, part of this is due to diminishing marginal returns that richer economies experience, but I think it still remains an encouraging finding for often cash-strapped emerging market economies. Now, the distribution of creative inputs and outputs, if you look at the slope of the line for those countries in the bottom section and the slope of the line for the countries in the top section, in that bottom section it's steeper, and so it says that the effect of creative inputs is stronger on outputs there. Now what we have to do, I think this is a good preliminary finding, but obviously really understanding the drivers of this relationship requires a bit more research and a bit more deeper analysis. However, what the CPI is able to do is it's able to compare countries to show where they perform well in certain categories and where they perform worse. A couple more policy implications. Shanti has been through some of these, but it's good to touch on them then again. Education in coverage in low and middle income countries in Asia. Most of these countries are close to achieving universal primary education. So the net primary and secondary school enrollment rates in Asia are 90% and 70% respectively for all Asian economies that we studied, so that's very high, with the exception of Lao PDR. For most Asian economies, what policymakers need to focus on now, which doesn't mean that they can ignore the extensive margin, but they also need to focus on the quality of education, as that is becoming more important for enabling innovation. On the supply and demand of labor, the growth of services and export-oriented sectors in many Asian countries has resulted in a jump in demand for job-specific skills. For example, in a survey that the EIU conducted on employers in Asia, 80% of the employers polled found that candidates were lacking in critical, behavioral, and academic skills, such as English language skills and computer skills for professional services types of jobs. So in terms of supply, the quality of tertiary education is a particular problem in Southeast Asia, with the exception of Singapore, and less so, of course, in Northeast Asia. One other thing is on university and industry collaboration. The rise of this global knowledge economy has intensified the need for these types of strategic partnerships between universities and industries. This is something that the US does particularly well. And if you look at Japan, it kind of lags on this particular measure of UI collaboration, university industry collaboration, and that's could be a useful avenue to explore in the future. And just one more slide on some of the policy implications. The CPI also looks, I think if you look at that graph on the right, you'll see how important E and M commerce is to Asia. So what that slide says is that the People's Republic of China in the fourth quarter of 2012, 55% of internet users made a purchase on their mobile phone. And to put that in context, in the same time period in the US, it was only 19%. So, Asian countries really are very fast forward in this field of mobile commerce. So, although mobile commerce has a very bright future in Asia, the demand for services on m-commerce is so high that it's threatening to outpace the capacity of networks, which is a mismatch that governments urgently need to address. Here, there's also a divide between developed and developing Asia. Singapore, the Republic of Korea, and Japan have all made huge investments in fixed and wireless connectivity and will stay ahead of the pack for years to come. But in developing markets, even though broadband providers are rapidly providing fiber optic connections in cities, if you go to the smaller cities or you go to the rural areas, they suffer from a lack of access. One of the indicators that we had was this thing called an app gap, which measures the ability of governments to deliver services over mobile or broadband networks. And countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, Laos, PDR score the lowest on that indicator. So governments need to look not just at how to accelerate the rollout of infrastructure, but also how to incentivize the uptake of technology in key areas such as health and education. And just to end very quickly, I think one of the things from the index, because of its focus on efficiency, is that a poor country may not be able to muster the same level of creative inputs as some of the rich economies, but what's important is that it can still benefit by using its resources efficiently. And precise recommendations on what those are really kind of economy specific, so we really have to dive into those countries. But I think the report does highlight a number of important policy areas that there can be increased emphasis on. Thank you.
Good morning again, everybody. I'm glad that now I'm going to make my usual 3 points. Whenever I speak, the first point will be about the relationship between our school and ADB. Second point, I'll talk about these 3 reports. And I'm going to tell you, just to give you a warning, that I thought this was going to be a very boring morning today. It's going to be a very exciting morning because I'm going to challenge some of the findings in these reports. And at the same time, finally, I'll conclude with a suggestion that as we look at, especially when we talk about knowledge-based economy in Asia, we should not just look at new knowledge, but also old knowledge. And that's what I hope to discuss with you today. So let me begin by highlighting a very key point, which is that as Bindu explained, I have a two-part connection with this event. Firstly, together with Larry Summers, I was very happy to co-chair the advisory group. And so it's when you co-chair an advisory group and they come up with this report, it's always very heartening. And so I was very happy when Bindu suggested that we launch the report here. But apart from that personal connection that I have with these the 2 reports that were put up by the ADB. The school also has a very deep relationship with ADB. In fact, we have a very deep and long partnership thanks to the leadership and support of Dr. Bindu Lohani. And I think it'd be fair to say that we have probably one of the most active partnerships with ADB. I asked my colleagues to do some research on what we are doing with ADB, and we've discovered, we've run the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Correct program on public-private partnerships, which we ran for 3 years, and we trained close to 300 government officials from Central Asia with the support of ADB. We also ran something called the Greater Mekong Economics Program, which we have run for 5 years and trained for 150 officials from 5 countries in the Mekong region. Thirdly, we have run the Public Policy Program for Vietnam, which we ran for 3 years, and we trained about 1,000 Vietnamese officials. So you can see the number of officials that have benefited. We've also run a summer internship program for our students, and for that we are very grateful that the ADB accepts our students as interns every year. We have also hosted ADB staff as visiting officials and members of our school. In addition, I must say, I also want to mention we are very grateful that we have received, I believe, more than $500,000 in research grants from the Asian Development Bank for doing research on healthcare in China, water infrastructure in India, mining in Mongolia, microcredit in Pakistan. So you can see what a remarkable range of topics we have been doing research on as a result of our partnership with the ADB. I also want to mention that our Institute of Water Policy was designated as the Asian Knowledge Hub on water governance by ADB. And of course, many of our faculty members have worked for consultants for ADB. Dr. Lohani also serves on the advisory board for the Institute of Water Policy. I'm also grateful that I've been invited to give a talk under the Eminent Speaker Series, and I'll be going back to Manila in October to give another talk under the Eminent Speaker Series. I'm telling you these stories to emphasize what a strong knowledge partnership has developed within the ADB and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and for that we are very grateful, Bindu, and I hope you'll convey this to your colleagues. And I actually believe that there is great potential for making the relationship even closer, in fact building on some of the points in these 2 reports that were issued by the ADB. Now the second point I'm going to make is that sometimes you're never quite sure how these reports come out, the timing is affected by various things. But I think your timing, Bindu, was brilliant. And this is my second point, that in terms of what Asia needs today, what it needs is reports like this, particularly at a point in time when the 4 countries that you did case studies on, India, China, Indonesia, and Kazakhstan, all now simultaneously have the benefit of very strong and dynamic and reform-minded leaders. And I think some of you may have seen an article which I wrote for Project Syndicate, I believe, where I pointed out it's somewhat unusual that 3 of the most populous countries in Asia, China, India, and Indonesia, simultaneously now have, by remarkable coincidence, 3 very dynamic, reform-minded leaders who are going to transform their countries. I mean, I've absolutely no doubt that Xi Jinping, who has just begun his 10-year term, will make a huge difference to the future of China. I think there are lots of people do believe that the previous government did not do enough in terms of economic reforms and opening up China. Clearly, the new government of Xi Jinping and Li Keqiang will be doing more. And in their efforts to do more for China, I have no doubt, if you ask me to name which capital is likely to read this report most carefully, I'm almost certain that Beijing is going to read this report, these 2 reports more carefully, because they are looking for innovative new ways of transforming the Chinese economy. Similarly, I also have no doubt that Prime Minister Modi is going to make a huge difference. Actually, I had the benefit of calling on him in my capacity as chairman of the Lee Kuan Yew World City Prize Nominating Committee in 2011. Ahmedabad was shortlisted, so I went to Ahmedabad and met him and spoke to him. And it's amazing what he's done with Gujarat. As you know, Gujarat was growing at about an average of 10% a year over 5 years, and clearly he's going to try and do the same for India as a whole. And I think, Bindu, he'll be very happy to hear your phrase, let's not just focus on highways, let's also focus on highways. And I think clearly India is going to do a lot of investments in that area, taking advantage of internet. And Shanti, I'm very glad you gave some wonderful examples from how ICICI has reduced the number of branches using the internet. And as you know, V. Kamath, who was the chairman of ICICI, was also a member of our advisory council. And I remember when we had our meeting in Manila, I was very struck by some statistics that Kamath, I think, gave at our meeting, where he pointed out that in Asia today, you're not just seeing a spread of mobile phones. The spread of mobile phones has been absolutely remarkable, from like almost zero in India and China in the 1980, 1990, less than 100,000, whatever it is. And then now both India and China are approaching, I think, 1 billion cell phones each. I mean, that's one of the most remarkable transformations in human history that we have not taken on board and not noticed what a huge difference it makes. And you know, at the same time, I think Kamath gave the statistic where India has gone from, within 4 to 5 years, from 5 million to 50 million smartphones. Now, smartphones, as you know, it's a great leap forward from the ordinary dull cell phone, because you can get everything you want on your smartphone. You get access to Wikipedia, you get access to this. Fishermen can find out what the best prices are for fish in various ports and go and download their fish at different ports. These are amazing things you can do with a smartphone. And I think you're going to see this acceleration of the spread of smartphones, and it's going to make a huge difference to productivity and growth and so on and so forth. So that's why I think this report is very timely. And similarly, by the way, I also had the pleasure of spending 7 hours with President Jokowi when he was Governor Jokowi on December 18th last year. He asked me to drive around with him. I could get to know him. And I can tell, and I've said this publicly, I'm very impressed by him. He's a remarkable leader, totally honest, totally dedicated to improving the conditions of his people, and also very efficient in getting things done. I mean, to give you one simple example, there was a highway that was 90% of which had been completed in Jakarta, and after President Suharto fell, nobody could complete the highway because you had to move some families, and for 16 years the highway was frozen, and within a few months Governor Jokowi solved the problem and the highway is now completed. That's an example of what kind of can-do man he is. So I think he also will do a lot. And Indonesia, as you know, as a country, is quite remarkable. I forget, I don't have the statistic now. Please use your smartphones and Google. I think Indonesia has the second highest number of Facebook users in the world. Fourth number of Facebook. It's amazing. I think in Asia, number 2, right? Yeah, but in the world, 4th, is it? Anyway, it's an amazing statistic. So here it is. And I can tell you, I was on a panel actually just 2-3 nights ago. What day is it today? Friday. Yeah, Wednesday night, I was on a panel with Tony Blair, Tony Fernandez, Ong Keng Yong, and Jin Li Chun from the China CIC. And Tony Fernandez, who spoke, and I chaired the panel, said, everybody else is going around the world for software development. I go to Indonesia for software development. People haven't discovered Indonesia. So that's an example of how, you wouldn't necessarily associate Indonesia with software development, but there, Air Asia has discovered it and is going there. And that the spread of IT obviously has made a huge difference. So you can see that we actually be on the verge of a major leap in productivity as a result of the spread of IT and as a result of the spread of smartphones and so on and so forth. So I really do believe quite genuinely that these reports are very timely, and I want to congratulate ADB for coming out with them at this point in time. I'm sure there'll be a debate about pros and cons and this and that, but in fact the debate in itself will be very important, because the debate is what will spur attention, bring attention to these products. And in that spirit, I'm going to start a debate on the Creative Productivity Index that has been produced by the Economist Intelligence Unit. And Sumana, nothing personal. Actually, I've had a long-standing battle with the Economist, so it's not nothing to do with Sumana at all. But I do think, I mean, and you can quote me on this, that the EIU is going to have egg on its face for having listed Laos as number 9 and Singapore as number 10 in the Creative Productivity Index. It's absolutely indefensible. It cannot be true. Something has gone drastically wrong in the analysis process. And I looking at I was trying to read the paragraph on Singapore on page 6 of the report. I encourage you to read it now if you don't mind. Because I think there are 3 possible areas where the errors could have come from on Singapore. The first one, if you notice, there is a line right in the middle after the line that says corruption is also rare and the city-state has a very flexible labor market. The next sentence says, Singapore performs relatively poorly in terms of mean years of schooling and the enrollment of students in technical and vocational programs. Now, there must be something wrong with this, because the whole world comes to Singapore to study our technical and vocational programs. And indeed, Shanti, in your very last slide, I remember your very last slide you put up, you actually said Singapore is the country that is one of the most highly regarded in technical education. I can tell you that the polytechnics in Singapore are more important than the polytechnics. The ITEs, Institutes of Technical Education, are regarded as the gold standard of technical education by the world. We have received several requests, including from India, to saying, can you please help us set up an ITE in India, because that's what India needs. So there's something obviously wrong, factually wrong with that sentence, and I think that's something that the EIU should investigate and say, how do you end up saying that Singapore is weak in technical education? Now, I'm sorry Wong Pokam has left, because he actually was one of the authors involved in this report. He helped to write the work section on Kazakhstan, but Pokam and I were discussing. Wong Pokam is a colleague of mine, also an adjunct, as a business school professor, and also an adjunct professor at Lee Kuan Yew School. And as Sumana mentioned, he said that when you're trying to give the relative weightage, I'm glad that the EIU gave high relative weightage to productivity and creativity in the agricultural sector. I think that's a right decision. But since Singapore and Hong Kong have zero agriculture, they should obviously, instead of giving them the average weighting in agricultural sector, because the average weighting is an arbitrary allocation. Why give it average and therefore lower its overall score? It would have been more effective to take out Hong Kong and Singapore out of the agricultural thing and find a different way of doing the relative weightage. And I think, Bindu, you referred to this in your remarks too, also as a factor, how maybe Singapore ended up being ranked behind Laos in the Creative Productivity Index. But the third thing, and this comes up, by the way, and I can refer this to look at the last line of the paragraph on page 6 again, and it says, let me read the last line to you. But the EIU believes that democracy and free debate are critical for innovation, and in the 2013 edition of our Global Democracy Index, we rank Singapore lower than Japan, Hong Kong, China, Taipei, China, Republic of Korea, Australia, New Zealand on this measure. This is a very telling line. Singapore is ranked behind Hong Kong, China on democracy. This will come as an absolute shock to the citizens of Hong Kong, because, as you know, that they are about to organize massive demonstrations in Hong Kong saying we want the right to choose our leaders. And yet they are ranked ahead of Singapore in the democracy index. So something has gone obviously wrong. So what has gone wrong? This is my theory. See, I'm a great fan of The Economist. I actually read The Economist every week. I pay for it, I subscribe to it, and I have been quoted in it many times. I know the editors. They're all friends of mine. Bill Emmett, John Micklethwaite, everyone. But I can tell you they have a blinkered Anglo-Saxon view of the world, which reflected a time when you had Western domination of the world order, which is ending, which is disappearing. The 200 years of Western domination of world history was a major historical aberration for 200 years, okay? Because from the year 1 to the year 1820, for 1800 of the last 2,000 years, the two largest economies in the world were always those of India and China. And it's only in the last 200 years that Europe took off and North America took off. So if you view the past 2,000 years, the last 200 years of world history have been a major historical aberration. It's perfectly natural for historical aberrations to come to an end. And what's remarkable, so few people are aware that sometime this year or next year, for the first time in 200 years, according to IMF statistics in PPP terms, China is going to emerge as the largest economy in the world. Now that's an earth-shaking development. But it hasn't shook London yet. I mean, Scotland may shake London, but China is not shaking London yet. And I say this quite, and by the way, I'm happy to debate John Micklethwaite or anyone on this issue, and to point out it's time for the economists to wake up and realize that the Anglo-Saxon parameters that you use to understand the world are outdated, irrelevant. That's a different world coming out there. You have to learn to deal with a much more diverse world order. So, and I think it's that Anglo-Saxon blinkered point of view that leads to them saying, hey, Hong Kong is more advanced in democracy than Singapore. I'm sure, as I said, this comes as a surprise. So this is an example. So I do think, and by the way, I noticed very interestingly, can I refer you to the very last, look at this report. Turn to the very last page, please. Let me read to you what the last page says. While every effort has been taken to verify the accuracy of this information, the Economist Intelligence Unit Limited cannot accept any responsibility or liability for reliance by any person on this report or any of the information, opinions, or conclusions set out in this report. Now, I suspect this is a normal thing that lawyers put in to protect it. But surely the Economist, you may not accept legal responsibility for this report, but the EIU has got to accept moral and political responsibility for this report, and I think it's going to have a very hard time. I mean, just to say that Laos does better in the Creative Productivity Index than Singapore is just so manifestly absurd that it's going to make it, I must say, very difficult for the EIU when this report gets circulated and people begin to study it and analyze it. As I said, Sumana, it's nothing personal here. I like the Economist's attitude of writing robustly in its criticism to other countries, and I'm sure the EIU is ready for robust responses from others in these reports. So finally, let me come to my point about old knowledge. And I think here, the key point I want to make, which actually develops on the point I made earlier, is, as we move from the era of Western domination of world history back to an era where Asia returns to its natural positioning in the world order, it is also natural for Asia to rediscover some of its old knowledge. And surely 2,000 years of civilizational history must have produced some useful knowledge which has been forgotten, but which can come back and be useful for Asia. And there are many areas where you talk of creativity, productivity, you can go to old knowledge and not just new knowledge. I just give you a couple of random examples. The first one, and this happened because I happened to be flying back from the Ambrosetti Forum in Milan a few days ago, on Monday, I think, and I was watching on Singapore Airlines a documentary. It's a lovely documentary, I recommend it to you, called Jiro Dreams of Sushi. And this is about a sushi bar in Tokyo, only 10 seats. By the way, Prime Minister Abe took Barack Obama to that sushi bar. 10 seats, because it's the only sushi bar with 3 Michelin star ranking. And it's run by a guy who is now 85, 86 years old, who I think left school at the age of 6 or 7, so I don't think he had any university degree or high school degree. But clearly, the story of his life, this old man, is absolutely fascinating, because he dedicated his entire life to just making sure that every piece of sushi he served today was better than the sushi he served yesterday. It's a life of continuous improvement, total dedication, and you watch the documentary explains to you how he does it. So you're talking about productivity, creativity. That's the kind of area where, and there's nothing high-tech about this at all. It's just total dedication to the art and to every step of the production process that is documented in that movie. And just imagine, some of the best cuisines in the world are Asian cuisines, right? And if you can develop them, right? Right now you pay a premium to go to French restaurants, to Italian restaurants. You'll soon be paying a premium to go into Asian restaurants, which are going to become equally creative and productive. And guess what? There's a lot of knowledge that goes back 1,000 years, 2,000 years you can take advantage of. And similarly, in another area, clearly one lesson we are learning in our modern times is not just about getting more prosperous, it's also about improving your well-being. And guess what? There's an incredible amount of knowledge in many Asian cultures, whether you talk of yoga or other things about improving your well-being and so on and so forth. And I'm glad to see that people are taking advantage of this. I find, actually, I stayed at a relatively high-end tourist resort in Maldives a few weeks ago, and they had a wonderful clinic on Ayurvedic medicine. And it's amazing to watch these people and to sort of explain to the modern world what Ayurvedic medicine is all about, and it's on the basis of 2,000 years of knowledge in this area. So I think this is an area, when we talk about Asia's role in terms of enhancing creativity and productivity, I completely agree. We should focus on the high-tech, on the highways and mobile phones and R&D. We should do all that, and I have absolutely no doubt that Asia can do very well in that area, but we should not forget the old knowledge that also Asia has. And if I have a suggestion for you, Bindu, for the future, I think we can maybe have a study on that also by the ADB and the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. We'll be very happy to collaborate with you. So with that, I hope we've had a reasonably interesting debate. I'm sure the debate will get much more intense if we now have our Q&A, if Hidayat invites us to that. So once again, thank you. We have the great pleasure of having a very distinguished panel here from my left to right. And I'm going to begin by giving Sumana, to be fair, a chance to respond if you want to some of my points, and then we can have Q&A from the floor too.
Sure, thanks for that. Thanks for the right of reply. Now, I think that the one thing that I want to focus on several things obviously to reply to, but one thing is that the index is a way of aggregating countries, right? So we are comparing countries that are very different. Japan is very different than Lao PDR, but we want to put them together for analytical purposes. So the rank the rank of the country is not the most important thing. I think what we are trying to look for is the deeper analysis behind that. And I'll start first with agricultural productivity, since that is one of the factors that we think is very important. So, when you're looking at creativity and you're trying to measure it, they're very, right now all we have is very imperfect measures, right? So even patents per capita, most people that study innovation and creativity will tell you that even that tends to be a relatively crude measure, and there's a lot of debate around that. But agricultural productivity is very important. It's certainly very important in Asia. And it's a necessary condition for not only poverty reduction, but also, when economies start to progress and when there's greater demand for food, it's almost a necessary condition for getting into different levels of economic growth as well. And that's why we wanted to capture agricultural productivity. And when you're trying to count it as well, agricultural productivity, what you're taking into account is some of these frugal innovations that are difficult to capture, especially across countries. So if you look at things like innovations in, say, access to finance for farmers, if you're looking at things like mobile banking that farmers have access to, those get actually captured in agricultural productivity and almost nowhere else. So I think that's why we looked at agricultural productivity as one of the important things in terms of all these output measures that we have. Now, of course, I think that Professor Dean Mahbubani is correct in saying that one way of looking at it as well is removing agricultural productivity from the counts and seeing where Hong Kong and Singapore fare. And what that will do is actually, it will bring down some of the economies, right? So some of the economies like India, perhaps Lao PDR, those guys tend, because of the focus on productivity in agriculture, tend to fall down the index. But it doesn't necessarily then push up some of the other countries that are there. And I think that we can also, it's very important to capture those frugal and invisible innovations in productivity. The other thing is that is this focus on efficiency, right? So there's so many indices that are out there. In fact, we might actually be at peak index, right? But that's why we wanted to look at efficiency. Now, Lao PDR, I wouldn't make it a focus. I think that the finding that we have is that Lao PDR is relatively efficient. What it has, the inputs that it has, it uses it well. Does it produce a lot of creative output? The answer is a resounding no. Does it have a very enabling environment for creativity and innovation? The answer also is no. But at that very low level, it's actually pretty efficient. Now, there's a lot of lessons to be learned for people that are looking at policies in Laos. There's a lot of improvements that they can make in their enabling environments to increase productivity. Now, and I wouldn't necessarily compare Singapore and Laos in that sense as well, right? Singapore is, as I mentioned, very high in innovation outputs. And so the other thing that I wanted to think, and maybe I suppose could be a question for people in the audience and could be a question for other members of the panel as well, is things like democracy and free debate. I know that Dean Mahbubani brought up the issue of Hong Kong and all these people protesting on the streets to say that they don't have enough democracy. Well, I suppose the question is, would those people be allowed to protest in Singapore, right? So what is the environment that you're creating in terms of democracy?
Okay. Thank you. Okay, the floor is open now. Yes, please. Do you have microphones, I hope? Actually, I have a mic, so I don't need...
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, Jake from the Wall Street Journal. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on that political point, and was asking for your reply, Mr. Sumana, to the accusation that the Economist has a Western bias, and how that might play into this report.
Some people were listening to me.
Yeah, I guess. I find that very surprising. First of all, I would like to say that the Economist magazine is a separate entity than the Economist Intelligence Unit. And what we have done here is a report by the Economist Intelligence Unit. So they're two separate things. I don't know whether, in fact, my colleagues at the Economist will even carry this article about this report, where other media publications have. But do we have a Western bias? I guess that's a question that you have to answer. We do have certain values. We value democracy, we value free trade, we value certain things that perhaps are termed as Western values. But also, I think that in this report, one of the things that we really try to capture is Asia-specific innovations. The innovations, if you're looking at patents per capita, that is something that perhaps of the way that it's counted or the way that scientific journals are published or owned, that in itself may have some kind of regional bias. And that's why we looked at factors like agricultural productivity, because we feel that's very important for the rural economies in Asia and also sort of across the world.
Can I, if you don't mind, can I add something? I agree with him. Sumana is right. Technically, the EIU is separate from the Economist magazine. But if you look at page 1 very carefully, if you look at the logo of the Economist, the full logo of the Economist is on the cover. So I think the branding and reputation of the Economist adds a lot to the standing of the EIU. I mean, if it was completely separate, you wouldn't have the Economist logo on page 1. Okay, question? Yeah.
Hi, esteemed panelists. My name is Vikraman Rajarethnam from University of Leicester. I'm studying mechanical engineering. Okay, the question is paradox of thinking between Western economies and Asian economies. If you look at Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and Albert Einstein, they are all very deep intellectuals, but they are very, in the sense that they have all experienced failures in life. Okay, and is the relationship between creativity and culture, or in that sense, very evident? Because when I look at UK, EPSRC, European Social Research Council, mostly are Indian and Chinese scholars, and the Chinese and Indian wave is getting stronger, I must say that. And even in institution of mechanical engineers, where I'm education liaison officer, I have seen Indian PhD scholars coming on board. So it's really a big thing now. I would like to pose the question to the panel now.
To who, sorry?
To everyone in the panel.
What's the question?
No, but your question is about the transformation. Is it why is it in the past you had a lot of Western scholars, now you have lots of Asians?
Yeah.
I think, as far as I know, it's just it's a factual point. It is true that even if you go to, I mean, one of the points that Tom Friedman makes, in his columns is that he said when you watch the people going on stage at the leading universities in the world, when the list of names read out, people who get PhDs in science and technology, the names begin with Lee, Wang, Kumar, Kapoor, and he says finally, in one of his columns, that finally one David Morrow appeared on stage. I mean, it's a fact, and I saw it myself when I went to my son's graduation from Carnegie Mellon. True enough, when the PhDs went to the stage, I saw an incredible number of Indians, Chinese, and other Asians. So that's just a statistical fact. But what the meaning of this is, I think we have to wait a few years to see what the impact will this be in terms of innovation, productivity, and so on and so forth. But I think it's quite clear that China is doing quite well, for example. I think if I'm not mistaken, again, Google and check. I think for the first time last year or this year, China is going to produce more scientific papers as judged by some technical standard than United States of America. And that's a remarkable shift, and that's an example of what's happening. Yes, please.
My name is Xinbing from Everbread Consultancy. My question is about the young generation's mentality. If we really seriously want to advance the knowledge-based economy, let's say, for example, if large or overwhelming majority of the young generation seems lack of the passion, the dedication, the drive, the fighting spirit to follow their heart, to pursue bigger dream as far as possible, much more beyond the materialistic achievement, which might be relatively easily measured, quantified, in particularly in Singapore context. Then how we can do more, rather in policy level or institutional level, or rather as education system, to encourage more young generation to see things far more beyond the materialistic objective or the KPI things. So I think that this is the key issue to spur further the knowledge-based economy, rather than the technical things, which is important, but in the long run is the culture and history, arts, which I concur with Odin's point of view. Then how to let the young generation to acquire that kind of dedication, the passion, the courage.
It's a very big, deep question, Bindu. How do you get young people to go beyond material incentives to deeper cultural?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think it's a relevant question. Again, let me remember my time when I was young. It's also related partly to the earlier question. I want to be an engineer, but there was no engineering school in my country.
In Nepal?
In Nepal, at that time. So obviously I had to find another country to go. And I wanted to have that, but to go outside, I couldn't pay. So what are the choices that they said, okay, government has 5 scholarships and you got to win one of them. And the whole focus of my parents was just to make sure that you get that. And when I go with a 98 out of 100 in math, my father will tell me, that's good. I said, no, this is the highest in the class. I said, no, there's still 2 points more. Because he was preparing for me to get into that. So we had such a regimented, focused training. I don't know if it was good. But there was no time to be creative. There was no time to take any risk. And there was no money to take the risk. So I think you have to think that the Asians come with the generations. And today, as Dean Kishore rightly said, is changing. A lot of people went to teach. I wanted to teach environmental engineering. There was no environmental engineering in my country, so I had to go and teach somewhere else. So people went. Some went to Asia, some went to Europe. So as a result, some stayed back. So things are different today. The countries do realize the values of this. I think it's all linked into your question particularly. Yes, the younger people today have a different way of looking at it. Now, when I say younger people, I look at my own children. They are much better off. He doesn't have to think, my son doesn't have to think about whether I can pay for education. So he has a lot more flexibility in where he wants to do, what he wants to do. And I think they naturally want today IT-related thinking. They want to win the world soon. They want to become millionaires soon. This mindset is not bad. Not bad. But it doesn't mean that they have to lose the culture completely. It doesn't mean that the son has to come to my home and finally said, totally ignore me or not follow any of the culture. I think there is a feeling sometimes that the new generation is not sensitive to that. It may need to be reminded, it may be a part of the education, and frankly, as much as we like what we want them to be, and I may not be happy with the kind of culture, the kind of expectations, but those people do know that. I can give them some degree of freedom, but they can learn much faster, and if they want to learn, they will learn. If not in the school, they will learn by themselves, and there's enough gadget now to do that. So I don't have much complaint if you were putting this as a complaint, but it is something as a national policy, in the education policy, in our daily life, we should keep on emphasizing that. But you can't force through the throat. Something which I had to take that in the early days. I think the environment is different.
You have something, Sumana?
Yeah, just it's sort of a separate point, but you know, a lot of times creativity and innovation is, you know, people focus on what the youth can contribute, and you know, you see a lot of it in these type of apps that are coming up. You know, people think that students in university now has become millionaires because you know they start all these different kinds of social networking sites that appeal to the youth. But you know, I think that given the way demography is changing in the world, we are going to see also, I mean, it's possible that we'll see a wave of innovation based on, you know, that demographic change, you know, based on an aging population. So I think that it's you know, you will see innovation from many different sort of sectors of society.
Okay. Okay, let me take another, this question. Can I just take this gentleman over here? I'll come back to you in a minute. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, I'm Calvin Chan from SIM University. I would
From-
like to
sorry, from
push
where?
the discussion
Sim.
to the age a little bit more, especially following the theme of advancing knowledge-based economy in the Asian context. In Asia, especially among the developing countries, the informal economy actually has a strategic role to play. I'm wondering, what is this role of the informal economy in developing a nation, or even developing a nation towards a knowledge-based economy? That's one. And also secondly, the other bit of the informal economy, knowing that actually is serving the lower rung of society normally. And in the West, especially these days, there's a lot of interest to talk about, at least in academia, on this notion of social innovation. When we look at the reports, or when I look at the reports, I realize that it's very high technology focus. And a lot of social innovation are actually low technology focus. Nonetheless, they are important in developing an economy. Perhaps a next study or something can be examined in terms of the role of social innovation in looking at knowledge-based economy development.
I'll get that. Maybe you can add if you want. You know, when we started doing this study, you had to put a boundary in a study like this, how much to do and what to do, what not to do. We really started with the premise, as I said in the opening remark, countries, most of our countries will be middle-income countries in a few years' time. And there is this possibility of being in the middle-income trap. So we want to say they all have aspirations to be OECD type of countries. And therefore we said, if this is the aspiration of the countries, let's go back and take a look what the OECD style of knowledge-based economy has been. And we benchmark with that. So, as you see in the report, we have put up a chart to say what is the OECD average, which comes to about 8.25. If you look like KE knowledge economy index, KEI, it comes 8.25, and then what's the Asian average is about 4.3. So there's a lot of opportunity to catch up. This is to demonstrate to the countries, look, you're not there, except for the 4 or 5 countries that we mentioned there, Singapore, Japan, Korea, Hong Kong, and China, and Taipei, China. Those are in the OECD range. But for others, there's a lot. Then we also did a chart there which sometimes gets unnoticed. If you take this index from 1 to 10, if you are, all these countries which are in the knowledge economy have the index of 8 or more. I mean, I'm not trying to see. So it gives you the distinct understanding that, oh, I'm below 8, I'm on a below $10,000. And the data falls all below $10,000 if you're below 8. It tells you also that, it also, the third thing it helps you to look at, and I think the EIU, you have a chart there which did the correlation between our KEI index and your CPI. It fits most of it except Laos, which is outlier. And those of you who have been doing statistical modeling, in every statistical modeling there are outliers. And outliers meaning that I can't explain, forget it. That's what the statisticians do. Or this is not explainable, this might need a separate explanation. Some people usually take it off the chart. Some people say, this needs to be studied in detail. So this is normal statistical way of handling. But generally the correlation is good, except for a few, which you have shown. So therefore, as you rightly said, we have not focused very much on the informal economy on this one. Social innovation, not so much, but to the extent the ICT part can capture, it is there. Whether it needs another study, I think it should be interesting to think of that. We haven't planned it yet. But the importance of informal economy and social economy, particularly in Asia, the developing Asia, is important.
Shanti, you want to add something?
Yeah, what you're saying is highly relevant because most of the employment in Asia is in the informal economy. So if you really make what you it's important to address that. So in the report we have given examples of frugal innovation, which is about serving the customers at the bottom of the pyramid.
There's an Indian word, jugaad.
Yes, exactly. The
Jugaad.
word jugaad emerged from India, and there is a huge, in fact, a huge network of institutions which are aiming to support such, like this, as you mentioned, social innovation. How to support that? Through social impact funds. ADB has done some work in what are the kind of instruments financing instruments that can support entrepreneurs at the bottom of the pyramid, with very small, like some of the examples I gave are all actually, the pictures are all about innovations that serve the poorer segment of, so high technology, but being pulled down to serve the poorer customers. So, and I think, the earlier point about youth, I think the gentleman has left, is also about that. The young people in rural areas, how can they access entrepreneurial opportunities? In Asia, apparently, entrepreneurship is more out of necessity rather than, if you cannot get a job, then you try to become an entrepreneur. But how to concretely support entrepreneurship at the bottom of the pyramid will again serve the informal economies very well. The examples of the rural energy program is a social innovation. And e-health is also an innovation that serves at the bottom of the pyramid. We have to do much more, indeed. Thanks.
Okay, maybe you'll take one. Sorry, you're supposed to finish by 11, but can I take both questions if you don't mind, quickly, and then we can adjourn.
Thanks. I want to ask the big one about Singapore, and not about its ranking, but about the difference between the inputs and the outputs. And I understand from the page on Singapore later in the report that it says Singapore patent applications.
Page what? Sorry, page what? Page what?
Page 73. It says that patent applications are quite low, and the number of books and films published are quite low. I'm interested, firstly, in why that is, given the amount of input, and secondly, whether these measures, such as to introduce the Mediopolis, are expected to improve those figures and bring Singapore higher up the ranking.
Okay, can we take the next question too? Then Sumana can answer, and I try to see if they can answer some too.
Yeah. First, I'm quite disappointed to see the Singapore ranking in the Creative Productivity Index. I want to ask when Sumana, you mentioned about the agricultural weightings in the Creative Productivity Index, but how about the service industries weightings? Do you have equal weightings for the service industry? Because when we are talking about the KPE, the service industries or the index related to the service industries must be taken into account. So I think if then I think when you take into account the service productivity index, then the ranking of Singapore would not be so low. Yeah, so that's why I say right at the beginning I'm quite disappointed at the EIU's finding. Thank you.
Okay, I think Sumana, you can start answering the two questions.
Sure. Yeah. So I think one thing to know is in an index, it's a snapshot, so it's one time period, and we're comparing across countries. And so things that we mentioned, such as Mediopolis, such as even technical and vocational education in Singapore, which, those statistics we've got from the Singapore government. We are just using it against all the other statistics. But improvements have been made, right? And not only in terms of the breadth and the quality of technical and vocational education in Singapore, but also sort of from a cultural standpoint, right? There is increasing acceptance that this is a way to kind of, it's an incentive to different types of careers that weren't available before, to secure and stable jobs that weren't available before, and to kind of exciting careers also in some of the things where universities in Singapore are not necessarily taking into account, such as aerospace engineering, those types of things. So, if we do this index and repeat this index a few years down the road, that's something that could possibly change as well. And I think that what we are also saying is that Singapore's inputs are extremely good, which means that it's sort of poised, right? If some of their inputs changed, that there could be a rapid increase as well in the number of outputs. And by no means I think that if you are saying that Singapore finishes below the Republic of Korea and Japan and Finland, I don't think that that's necessarily surprising. All of these economies have very high level of outputs, and so when you're comparing them, obviously one finishes above the other. But I think the importance is trying to dig down, and I think that that's the point, is that we have some interesting findings in terms of which types of economies benefit more from increasing their inputs, and it's really kind of warrants further investigation at the country level.
You want to answer his question about the weightage?
Sure, yeah. So, I think that's one of the things that, trying to capture services in an economy is not particularly easy. So in terms of, and especially trying to capture innovative outputs, that's something that's very difficult. As I mentioned, that's a very elusive type of measure. And so we went with things that we could measure. Agricultural productivity is something that's much easier to measure. And also I think the reason that we chose it is that's very important for Asia. In terms of things that developed economies are probably more suited for, one of the output indicators that we chose was the level of export sophistication. So not only the quantity of your exports, but actually what are the quality of your exports. And the argument there is that the focus should be also on exporting goods that are of much higher quality. So in terms of innovation outputs, we thought that the level of export sophistication would be a good measure to capture that, and that's included in the index.
Just go ahead.
I'm going to not talk on the CPI, but the main report, if you look at the main report, what we're saying there to the other countries are, what can you learn from Singapore? There is this exactly on page 13 and 14 of the report. We said them it was a labor-intensive growth back in the 60s, to skill-intensive growth in the 70s, to capital-intensive growth in the 80s, the technology-intensive growth in the 90s, and in 2000, the knowledge economy-based growth. I think this is what the countries at different stages could be looking into, how Singapore did it. We also tell them that Singapore has done extremely well in providing the research and the R&D budget as proportion of the GDP, which is 2.3% now, and planning to get to maybe even 3.5% by 2015. We tell countries, most of the countries are far below, less than 1.5%, which we minimum recommend. So countries, we tell them, if you want to be in the innovative space, in the knowledge-based economy, you're going to have to beef up your the research knowledge like it has done. We also tell them that you need to invest, like Singapore has done, in trade and logistic, which it has done so well. If you take the World Bank Logistic Performance Index, it ranks pretty well. We tell them that Singapore has become a business financial hub. It's ranked very high, and identify a few areas of center of excellence, and depending on the country's own priorities, ability to compete in the space, you need to identify certain areas become the center of excellence in future. Like Singapore had in biomedical and a few areas. I don't know, each country can figure out what that will be for them. So there's a lot of things in the first part that where we tell them, people, many countries could learn from the experience of the Singapore, as much as we say from Korea and Finland. We give 3 examples. Thank you.
So just a quick word on patents. Again, I'm sorry Wong Po Kam is not here, but in the private conversation, he was telling us that the reason why, for example, Taipei has a lot of patents is that they have the semiconductor industry and they patent everything, and they produce thousands of patents, you know. So sometimes the nature of the industries you have actually affects the number of patents you produce, because some industries are more patent intensive than other industries are. So that's one possible technical explanation too. So anyway, I think on that note, you'll all agree that we had quite an exciting morning here. It wasn't the usual boring floating of reports. So please join me in thanking everyone here for the presentations.